It is officially game day once again, and we are on the wheel of producing Week 2 fantasy football content for you guys, and I would not have it any other way, guys. I'll tell you that right now, because I am so glad that we are back to weekly football games. And there's lots of good scoring potential matchups in this particular week of fantasy football. Now, I got a lot of comments leading up to the creation of this video about people being excited about this defense rankings video because there's a lot of tough decisions out there for week 2 fantasy football. And it is absolutely true. There are also lots of smoke and mirrors from week 1. That happens every single year. So that's super important to note. And what's also super important to note is how important defenses are to fantasy football when you've got defenses like Dallas and New York Jets literally winning weeks in week 1 fantasy football. So today we're going through the top 12 fantasy football defense rankings for week 2 fantasy football, and I am one of the only fantasy football YouTubers who covers defenses consistently every single week. So please make sure to drop a like on this video and subscribe to the channel to show the channel's support. It is greatly appreciated. Number 1, we're going to kick it off with our first tier. We've got the San Francisco 49ers taking on the Los Angeles Rams in Los Angeles this week. So obviously, last week when you're thinking about San Francisco, they suffocated the Pittsburgh Steelers defense. And really, that was not much of a shock to me. They totally embarrassed the Pittsburgh Steelers at home. Sacks, turnovers galore. Like, they had plenty of it. As you can see on the screen, they had plenty of both of those. Now, this week, they're taking on the vaunted Los Angeles Rams offense that killed the Seattle Seahawks in week 1. I heard a lot about this one, too, because all offseason, really dating back to the earlier part of the offseason, I was saying that the Los Angeles Rams offense is not going to be very good. So I heard plenty about it after that week 1 performance that they put up. And what I'll come back with is not only do I think it's actually a fluke what happened in week 1, but I actually think that they're going to get exposed by the San Francisco 49ers this week in particular. Seattle's defense is not nearly on the level of the San Francisco 49ers defense. Let's stack them up really quick. The Los Angeles Rams' weakness last week was run efficiency. That was their weakness on offense. They had 2.2 rushing yards per carry average combined between Cam Akers and Kyren Williams. They're not an efficient running team. Why? Because they don't have a good offensive line. San Francisco, on the other hand, suffocated Pittsburgh on the ground game. 41 rushing yards allowed, tied for first in the league in that particular category. Matt Stafford was also sacked 0 times in week 1. San Francisco had 5 sacks in week 1 versus the Pittsburgh Steelers. The Rams are going to get a massive reality check this week. I think San Francisco's defense is in line for a 15 to 20 point game. Moving on to number 2, we've got the Dallas Cowboys taking on the New York Jets at home in Dallas this week. So here's the thing about Dallas's defense, man. They're absolutely dominant on the level of San Francisco. Their defense is unreal, man. 7 sacks in week 1, 3 turnovers, 2 more forced fumbles, 1 defensive touchdown, and they even added a freaking special teams touchdown to give you 37 fantasy points and probably win you your fantasy week in week 1. Truly an unbelievable performance. That's one of the most dominant performances I've seen by a defense in a very, very long time. This week, they're getting the New York Jets without Aaron Rodgers. That's a big deal here. The Jets are just not going to be able to throw. Not only because Zach Wilson sucks, but also because Dallas's defense is very good through the air as well. Breece Hall can break off a few plays here and there, and so can Garrett Wilson. But I expect Dallas to get more turnovers this week, and they're going to be another dominant fantasy play in week 2. Moving on to number 3, I've got the New Orleans Saints taking on the Carolina Panthers in Carolina this week. So New Orleans defense, they're honestly rock solid. Like, they're a very, very good defense. They are very physical and they force turnovers, and they did exactly that in week 1 versus Tennessee. 3 sacks in week 1. They were obviously dealing with a quarterback who was not very good, though. Like, we're not going to play around like Ryan Tannehill's still some good quarterback. He's not. He was awful in week 1. He was probably the worst quarterback in week 1. They're getting another great matchup again here against the Carolina Panthers. Carolina is not a good team, guys. They had 3 turnovers in week 1. They've got a rookie quarterback. They've got a bad offensive line as well. It's a bad combination here for Carolina, but it's a great combination here for New Orleans, and that's why they are a top 3 defense in fantasy football in week 2. Now we've got number 4 here, Indianapolis Colts taking on the Houston Texans in Houston this week. So this actually might just sound like, yeah, it's a matchup play, right? You play a defense against the Houston Texans. Honestly, this one runs a little bit deeper than that. I was actually really impressed by what I saw from the Colts defense in week 1. They had 2 turnovers and 3 forced fumbles against a Jacksonville Jaguars offense that is significantly better than the Houston Texans. This defense is pretty physical. I watched that game and I was really impressed with how they looked. The matchup is obviously great this week too. Like we're not gonna dance around that either. That's why they're this high on the list right here. I mean, Baltimore, they had 5 sacks against Houston last week. Another rookie quarterback, a rookie head coach here. Indianapolis easily could have a 15-point week this week in fantasy. Moving on to number 5, we've got the Giants taking on the Arizona Cardinals in Arizona this week. So obviously, this probably sounds a little crazy considering how badly the Giants got embarrassed in week 1. We just got through talking about it. They were the only defense in fantasy football with negative points in week 1. The only defense to do it. They did a great job at getting you negative points than what you came in beforehand with. Great job by them. But here's the difference between the 2 matchups. Like, and everybody knows this, right? Dallas is a true Super Bowl contending team this year, or a playoff contending team. If you don't think they're Super Bowl contending team, totally fine with it. I think they are personally, but they're absolutely, I think everybody acknowledges, a playoff team this year. Arizona Cardinals is in the Caleb Williams sweepstakes this year. They're not competing for anything. They're not even close to the same level of talent as Dallas is. Offensively, defensively, I don't care. They're literally the exact opposite. So the Giants here, they're getting a huge break in the week 2 matchup right here. Arizona had just 210 total yards in week 1, and it's hard to judge how good or bad the Giants defense really is after that type of performance. But I'm betting on a major defensive bounce back here for sure against one of the worst teams in the NFL. Dropping down to number 6, we've got the Jets taking on the Dallas Cowboys in that Dallas matchup in Dallas this week. So this may or may not sound crazy. I don't know what end of the spectrum you are, if you're a matchup guy or if you just acknowledge that this defense is so freaking good. Dallas's offense obviously just abused the New York Giants defense this week, so it may sound a little bit hard to rank them this high. And obviously, New York Jets, they're a lower morale team right now without Aaron Rodgers. That's a huge problem for the defense in specific, because the defense, with a good quarterback, they know that if they get them the ball back, that the quarterback can at least lead them down the field and score points and probably get them in a position to win. If you're a defense playing for Zach Wilson, this is not a situation where you're actually looking at it thinking, man, we can get the ball back to our quarterback and he's going to lead our offense down the field. So this is a problem for the Jets for sure. But like I said, this defense is so freaking dominant. 5 sacks against the Bills, 4 turnovers, and Buffalo has the better quarterback than Dallas does. That's not a question. So I think that the Jets defense is actually going to keep this game relatively interesting for a little while and get a turnover or 2 in this game. Moving on to number 7, I've got the Denver Broncos taking on the Washington Commanders at home in Denver. Honestly, you know what's funny about this? The top 2 defenses in week 1 were Dallas and the New York Jets. You know who was the number 3 defense on the week? It was the Arizona Cardinals, who played the Washington Commanders, man. 6 sacks, 3 turnovers. And we're not talking about some Lawrence Taylor defense here with the Arizona Cardinals. That's not the case at all. Washington's offense is honestly just anemic. That's what the reality here is here. And the Denver defense is much better than Arizona's defense is here. And the matchup is just really good here. I can't not have Denver inside the top 10. We've got Philadelphia's defense at number 8 here, taking on the Minnesota Vikings. So in the offseason, in late July, I came out with a defense ranking video before the season started, and I had Philadelphia lower on that list, and I said because they lost both their starting linebackers, both their starting safeties, and a key piece on the defensive line in Javon Hargrave, they were going to regress this year. I may have been wrong on that one. I may have absolutely been wrong because they still looked dominant in week 1 versus the New England Patriots. Now, granted, that was a New England Patriots offense they were dealing with, so they were not going up against Patrick Mahomes in that matchup. We're not going to talk about the New England Patriots in the same class as like the Kansas City Chiefs. But Philadelphia's defense absolutely still looked good. They're taking on the Minnesota Vikings at home this week. I think the pass rush is going to cause a lot of problems tonight for a guy like Kirk Cousins, and I could see another turnover or two for this defense just because of that alone. Number 9, we've got the Atlanta Falcons taking on the Green Bay Packers at home in Atlanta this week. Now, I debated putting the Atlanta Falcons in my top 12 video in July. That's how big I was on the Atlanta Falcons defense. And while they're not dominant enough for me to regret not putting them on there exactly, this defense is actually very, very good. They were really good in week 1. They've got a good front 7 with Grady Jarrett and Calais Campbell. They've got a good secondary with AJ Terrell and ball-hawking safety Jesse Bates. They took advantage of the Carolina Panthers in week 1. This is a tougher matchup here for sure. But let me tell you why they're in the top 10 this week. So Atlanta's weakness in week 1 was their rushing defense. They gave up 154 yards on the ground in week 1. Now, look at the Green Bay side. Aaron Jones, if he plays, is probably not going to be healthy. He suffered a hamstring injury in that week 1 matchup. That's going to be a problem for Green Bay because A.J. Dillon averaged 1.5 yards per carry versus a very inferior Chicago Bears defense. Atlanta is also strong against the pass as well, and Atlanta is also at home. So there's a lot of factors here that lead me to believe that Atlanta actually, I think, can control this game through the run game on their offensive side and put Green Bay in a deficit in this game. And at that point, we'll see how good Green Bay's offense does playing from behind. So I'm playing a betting game here because we haven't seen Green Bay play from behind, and we don't know quite how good Atlanta's defense is yet, but I'll bet and put my money on Atlanta's defense over the Green Bay Packers offense if that's exactly what happens. Now, number 10, I've got the Washington Commanders taking on the Denver Broncos in Denver this week. Now, there's two main things here to this piece right here. Washington's defense is very, very good. Their front 7 is stout. They've got a decent secondary. Washington is a very, very rough defense to deal with. And Denver's offense just isn't that explosive. Denver's offense isn't bad. Like, it's not as bad as it was last year. But Russell Wilson is not the same player. And obviously, they were missing Jerry Jeudy. Now, Jerry Jeudy may very well come back and play this week. And it probably moves the needle just a little bit for this offense. But Washington's defense is so good. And I think they're still going to be a very solid option in week 2 fantasy football. Dropping down to number 11, I've got the Cleveland Browns taking on the Pittsburgh Steelers in Pittsburgh on Monday night. So there's a couple of different layers to this particular ranking right here. So Cleveland only had 9 points in fantasy football, holding the Cincinnati Bengals to 3 points in week 1. Now, obviously, a 9-point week, like that's not bad at all. That's a pretty good week for a fantasy defense. But it's not as high as you think it would be when a team beats someone else 24-3. But the main difference here in this particular matchup is whenever Cincinnati isn't doing well offensively, they don't just completely fall apart. They don't just start turning the ball over left and right. That's what Pittsburgh's offense does. Pittsburgh's offense did that in week 1 versus the San Francisco 49ers. And obviously, Cleveland Browns defense, they're never my favorite play particularly, but the matchup here is pretty good, and I like the sound of playing Cleveland, and that's why they're here at number 11. Dropping down to number 12, rounding out the top 12, we've got the Houston Texans taking on the Indianapolis Colts at home in Houston. This one is probably going to sound crazy to you right here. I mean, we're talking about a historically bad defense over the last several years. There's no way around that at all. But let's break this down really quick because obviously I'm not going to just throw a defense in there that I don't actually think could be a top 12 defense. I have a reason for putting Houston at this level at number 12, rounding it out. So let's break it down here. They lost 25-9 versus the Baltimore Ravens in week 1, and they still had 8 points as a fantasy defense. Now, why was that? Well, the reason is because they pressured Lamar, they sacked him several times, and they led to 2 turnovers on that defense right there. So this defense is very, very physical, and they can rush the passer, and they are a very well-coached defensive team because they have DeMeco Ryans, former player in the league, former linebacker, defensive head coach, puts the emphasis on the defense during this offseason, and obviously just a defensive philosophy head coach. And while I do love Anthony Richardson's trajectory throughout the 2023 fantasy football season specifically, he is still prone to rookie mistakes in week 1, which he showed versus the Jacksonville Jaguars. So I think that Houston absolutely could get a turnover or 2 in this game as well. And I think that since this is a divisional game in Houston, I actually think that Houston could keep this game pretty close for a while at home. So let me know what you think of the defensive rankings in the comments below and what matchup questions you need answered before tonight and week 2 fantasy football. And if you want to see the top 30 running back rankings for week 2 fantasy football, click on this video right here.